Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
Hello, we're here at MacDonald, and we're sitting down with Graeme, who's a proprietor and a real tour de force behind the brand and a steward of a piece of To Kalon. I honestly wish you guys were here because even on the drive, magic was happening. It's a sacred space. And I really can't wait to talk about the past, the present, and the future with Graeme. So my first question is about your background. How did you come to be in this place?
And in my case, I was born into it. I didn't totally understand that at the time. It was my grandma and grandparents' house and their parents before them. I just became interested around high school in growing things. And then one day, the vineyard always used to be a place to play, and you don't even really notice what vines are and what they're doing there. And then one day my eyes opened and I've moved up here and never looked back.
How old were you when you came here?
So I started work when I was born. 2 weeks later, they brought me up here for the first time, but I started working and living in the valley in the garage in Grandma's house in 2002, so I was 18.
Wow. So you've spent the last really several decades, very, very close to this land.
Yes.
Have you ever had any ambitions to go elsewhere and do other things, explore other worlds?
Yeah, when I was younger, I did more of that, and I found such a strong draw to home. There were times where I had desires to go work in Europe and work abroad, and I even had internships lined up that fell apart, which have absolutely influenced where I ended up, which I'm so grateful for as well. But I think there was a strong pull to stay home, and so I'm very, very much a product of the local industry.
Wow. So how did it all begin? What happened when you started living and working here full time?
So I was 18 years old, and I was trying to figure out somewhere where I could work, and nobody really wanted to hire an 18-year-old at the time. So what ended up happening is we have a family friend who has a little winery called Elizabeth Spencer in Rutherford, which at the time was in a office in St. Helena, and we were doing all the business through the office. And we met with him, and I said, would you be willing to let me learn through osmosis? And he said, absolutely. Here's harvest is coming up. Why don't you show up? And for about 2 weeks for free, I showed up and did anything I could, from sorting grapes to sampling to absolutely everything to impress him. And at the end of that, he said, oh, well, that was fun, and it's fun having a young person who's excited. So he invited me back every summer while I was at school at Davis.
Very good. So what were you studying at Davis?
So my father forced me to start undecided. My interest was almost instantly viticulture enology, and I think the family were worried that farming was too hard of a life. And so he was specifically trying to probably gear me to become a lawyer or a doctor or something more more respectable. But I couldn't go that path, and I just kept taking more and more classes related to viticulture and falling deeper into the trance, and eventually fell in love with it and transferred in.
I love the word trance. It's mesmerizing, and that's been an ongoing theme ever since I really found out about you in my head. So when you kind of pushed for the viticultural credentials and such like that, I'm assuming you graduated with a degree in enology, right?
Yes.
And then you came back here straight after that? Or?
Yeah, so I was working summers so that I could get real world experience. The difference between what you learn in school and in the industry is quite different, actually. So
isn't that true for all education?
Yeah, so I was a little bit in shock sitting through some of my very impressive and intelligent professors, and wondering if I should write that down, considering everything I had done. Working for Elizabeth Spencer was somewhat different, but yeah, that was just the way I managed it, and I think it actually allowed me to do something which was even more wonderful, which was ask relevant and good questions. So with my professors, my favorite ones, I could sit down their office hours and specifically ask things. Like I remember my viticultural professor was explaining to me that a vine, if you water it on one side of the vine, the roots can transfer the water to the other side and sort of push it into the dirt and then restore it. So that kind of stuff is what made it more magical. It wasn't just the basics. It was actual next level ideas.
Wow. Were there mentors, and not just during that time, but throughout your life experience, that you feel really contributed to your, perception of viticultural and enology and plant biology, but also life?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm a sponge for information. I'm one of the farmers and winemakers who all I want to do is learn, and I'll never stop. If that happens, I'll lose interest very quick.
Yeah.
But along the way, so besides Spencer and his wife Elizabeth, who took me under their wing, when I moved up here, I didn't know a single person when I was 18. So I started. I had one connection through Spencer and Elizabeth, which was Alex Consgard, who's become a good friend of mine. So for about a year or two, we'd see each other passing in town, and I'd wave and he'd wave, and that was about the extent of our relationship. And at some point, we finally connected and did a tour of their family winery. And in the small world of Napa, what we realized is our grandparents had been friends.
That's amazing.
So that became sort of the precedent for my first friendship in Napa, and through him and his father especially. His father took an interest, and always does, in the next generation of winemakers, and his dad himself, John Consgard, is very much a legend in the valley. And so he, in many ways, directed me around to where I would end up working, and one of them being he connected me with Abe Schoner from the Scholium Project. I had worked at Colgan Cellars, Opus One, which are both very particular, very
regimented.
Yeah, very regimented places. And I was just about to do an internship in Europe through Opus with Chateau Palmer, and I couldn't get the visa to work out. It was too complicated, and they didn't like having Americans taking Frenchmen's jobs. So
politics.
That ended up falling through. And so John introduced me to Abe, and after I started working with Abe, John eventually told me, he said, the reason I did that is I was afraid you were going to be too uptight.
Well, Abe is the exact opposite. I mean, if there's a mad scientist, alchemist that everybody admires and a little bit afraid of, that has to be it.
Exactly.
What was it like?
It was my first introduction post the Mondavi winery to real wine culture, where I feel like it wasn't a business, it was a lifestyle. And the premise of Scholium was challenging all the preconceived notions of technical winemaking, and to think philosophically. Everything was I was the first ever Davis or wine educated student in there, which made them all very nervous too. But I found it as such a relief, because never before we'd always been so conservative with the winemaking in order to make the wine safe and stable, that the premise at Scholium was to let things happen, let the natural processes, and then follow them. So from a learning aspect, I got to see wines all throughout their transition without the protections that a careful winemaker would have done, and then see the results of that too. So you get flavors and textures that you would have never gotten had you been more conservative.
So what have you learned from that in terms of risk taking and, kind of going off the grid a little bit? How did that influence you as a winemaker?
I think it's invaluable, because if you don't take risks, you don't seek the rewards. I mean, everything I do now in winemaking makes me nervous. Yet it's a better connection to the natural product. So I could do everything I could to create a stable wine and intervene, yet the way to capture the sense of nature in the wine, which is the ultimate thing. If you can get wine that's not just taste descriptors but has an ethereal taste aspect for our family, it's the history, it's the naturalness of how we grow, and that kind of thing was incredibly powerful. And before I went to Scholium, all I would read is my textbooks from Davis and all the technical ways, and then after that I've almost never looked at them again. All I read is philosophy.
Wow, that's very powerful. So your head was completely changed in some ways about sort of this helicopter view of your craft.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, it just taught me that, as you were saying, that risk taking is so much a part of the natural process, and it takes amounts of experience to become comfortable with that. But I think the true rewards are the closer we get to nature, is the closer we get to the idea of terroir, or whatever you want to call it, but the sense of place that you want to convey in a wine.
Yes, and it seems like, unfortunately, it became a marketing term, but there's real gravitas to it. And I feel that it's a process. You're in a constant search for that truth.
Absolutely, and you can't be provincial in your thinking or you can't have protocols in your winemaking. I mean, I feel like you have to adapt to the wine, you have to adapt to the vintage, and it's really what connected me to farming, not just winemaking, because so many of the decisions you can make that could create the wines that you're trying to achieve happen in the vineyard. And so that's another marketing cliche, but the truth is, when you have a vintage where there's not enough sun, or the ripening is happening, you can leave longer shoots, or you could control your cover crop differently if you want to conserve water. And so you're so much more connected to the land when you're actually farming it.
It sounds like it's in a state of constant flux that keeps you on your toes. It's very stimulating, I'm sure maddening at times, but you have to have an active listening skill to the vineyard that you're tending to and to the land. Is that one of the paramount qualities and values of yours? It's one of my favorite things, and the best example I can give of that is we have a younger block that Bob Mondavi planted for my grandparents, that as my parents' generation were all off living separate lives, and so it's the only block that we irrigate, and which is a challenging thing as a young person to understand. Well, I'm in control of this adding water to the vine, which is a huge manipulation. How do I do that in a knowledgeable way? And someone taught me, which I thought was so powerful, is you don't need a scientific measurement device to categorize your vine stress. You walk through and you touch the leaves, and you can feel a leaf that's under stress feels hot, and a leaf that's transpiring is cool because of the water passing through it. So you can just by feeling or walking your vineyard, you can tell what it's asking for, and you just have to be willing to accept that it might be talking to you. Wow, that kind of dialogue. I mean, I have goosebumps right now, and you literally are relating to another life. It happens to be plant life, but you're willing to bond with it, you're willing to connect with it. It's not just a vineyard, it's really part of your environment. And that kind of connection is really quite something, isn't it?
Yeah, someone once told me a great analogy. She's Australian, so she was talking about the Aboriginal people in Australia, that if you take them away from their land, it was like severing their soul.
Oh my.
And I deeply feel like, not only from a historical standpoint of farming the same vines as our great grandparents, but just being connected to nature and trying to make decisions to be part of it as opposed to controlling it.
Wow. So let's go back just a little bit, because I'm sure as a young person taking over a family vineyard, it's daunting and a lot of pressure, because this is such a storied location. You had to have felt that you were stepping into a huge pair of shoes. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so that was exciting. It's the business started with me and my brother. We were both interested in this. He was at Berkeley studying business, and I was at Davis studying wine. And I thought that would be a fun connection. We're the only two grandchildren too, so it's ours to screw up. And so the first thing we did was approach the family, and I was interested in starting to make some home wine. This is around 2004. and what was funny and what was very interesting is I'm making these home wines. I'm working and I'm doing various viticultural work around the property in order to exchange for the fruit. And the time comes when we actually wanted to start making our own wine. And so we approached the family, and our aunts, and our grandmother was very supportive, but at the time she had backed away from managing, and everyone else was very skeptical. So they were worried about the price per ton and how to manage all the family finances. And it was very obvious very quickly that those conversations weren't going very well.
Uh-oh.
And so what ended up happening is we opted to we said, well, we weren't asking for nepotism. We were asking for grapes, and we're willing to pay whatever Robert Mondavi's paying at the time, who was buying our grapes. And so our family said, oh, well, in that case, that sounds great.
You changed the conversation. Good on you.
So we were buying the grapes, and what ended up happening is we went from half a barrel to 1 barrel to 3 barrels, and about the time where we were at 3 barrels, me and Alex wrote a grape check that was 3 times the size of our life savings.
Oh my.
And we told the family, said, please cash this in a month. We need to go start selling our first vintage. And that was when we released our first vintage, which was 2010.
Wow, that must have been quite nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I think I'm surprised I got through that. All the stress-related symptoms that I recall now going through it, and not to mention just the amount of just interesting publicity where we decided never to market the wine, never press release, never tell anyone. We wanted it to all be word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And we completely underestimated what the internet can do for word of mouth. And so we were very quickly
flooded.
Inundated with people that were excited. And we had to navigate managing that. We had to navigate people who were upset about that, and particularly in that my brother said one of the most common emails he kept receiving from people, and again, this is nobody has ever tasted the wine, it's never been released, and people ask, well, who's your vineyard manager and who's your winemaker? And my brother's response was, it's my brother. Mm-hmm. It's my brother. Mm-hmm. And he said that would just stem an instant reaction of, oh my God, why would I spend money on an unknown winemaker, an unknown vineyard manager? It's not one of the fancy consultants. And so personally, I'm seeing all this, hearing it vicariously through Alex, and I could not have been more stressed out. It's still such a personal thing to me, but to have people sort of have preconceived notions, and we're trying to do something so humble and honor the family, that it was that was a really difficult time. And so I can credit the turn in emotion absolutely to a handful of people in the industry. So I remember watching these wine forums and online things that I've been reading since I was 18.
Sure.
And just seeing them waterfall out of control in regards to negativity and accusations. And so what ended up happening is first was Tegan Pasalacqua, who's the winemaker at Turley.
Of course.
He posts something saying, well, this is one of the most authentic and exciting projects that has happened in the Napa Valley in a long time.
Very
and then
cool.
Morgan Peterson, Russell Bevan, Roy Piper. I mean, the list goes on and on of people who just kept saying that. And then the tide completely turned to all the emails were, oh my God, how do I get this? and it was just incredible after that. But it's all because of friends in industry.
Wow, they're definitely a powerful opinion makers. And actually, we're sitting in the kitchen where I see a bottle of Bedrock and a bottle of Bialy right next to your bottle. So I know this must be long-term relationships that you formed.
Yes, no, we're very lucky to have met so many interesting people. But I think what draws everyone together, in case of Bedrock and Turley, and for us it was old vines.
Yes, of course.
In my family, because my granddad had a stroke when I was young, and our parents lived different lives, the knowledge of farming didn't pass down, and so I had to rely on friends to teach me how to manage old vines, how to dry farm. So becoming friends was almost a necessity in my mind. I needed to learn, and they've all been super generous with with allowing me to enter their vineyards and learn and take all that in through osmosis, and then farm in a way that I feel like is not going to kill anything.
There's so many misconceptions about Napa Valley, unfortunately, and one of the ones that perhaps is the most bothersome is that people are not collaborative, and what you described couldn't be further from the truth. You were embraced by the colleagues and welcomed with open arms, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, and I'm a product of all that collaboration. I'm not, like I said, I don't do what someone else does. I take in everybody's ideas, and then you create your own thing and hopefully build upon that. And the Valley in the 90s and 2000s during the cult wine era, I feel like had more austerity, and it was popular to keep consumers and people at an arm's length, or have trade secrets, which to me was very hard to understand, considering wine's been around for thousands of years. There's not many secrets that remain.
A great thought that is.
And one of the things that drove me is our family has been selling grapes to the Robert Mondavi winery since its inception, and to Charles Krug before that. And so everyone has a Bob Mondavi story, but for us it was so powerful because he really felt like, and this is one of his sayings, said, a rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah.
And I do feel like when you have a piece of land that you absolutely believe in, there's no competition. You're just trying to express it as purely as possible, and there's no way that you're going to compete with your neighbor who might have something different geologically, and you just want to see them succeed because we'll all succeed because of it.
And since you touched upon the history, I want to talk about your role and how diligently you've been researching the history of To Kalon. And please tell us about, I know it's many hours and it's a huge project of passion. So I want to hear a bit more detail about how it came about and what keeps you engaged and what it does all mean.
For me, there's I was reading when Sarah was pregnant with our first daughter. She had a stack of parenting or prenatal books, whatever they're called, that I was supposed to get through, which was really, really hard. It was kind of like reading the textbooks all over again, and I was not doing it, so she was getting increasingly upset. But I was reading a book about Mennonite farmers, which I found much more interesting. And there was a chapter in that book about raising children, so I was kind of convinced that I was going to have something that I could show her. And I'll never forget it. It was it had a line that you don't start raising a child at birth, but 100 years before they're born, because that's when you shape the environment they're born into.
Wow. And
I've never seen anything or read anything that better describes what it means to be part of a multi-generational family vineyard. And so when I read that and started to realize that there is such thing as a genealogy of the land, that's when I completely connected to this historical research. I felt like even beyond our family, back into the early days, that any understanding, this is also a desire to learn, any understanding I could glean from people who had lifetimes of experience, I wanted to read about. And so it actually started, this was interesting, is when my grandparents had been selling grapes to the Mondavi since they purchased the property in the 50s, they ended up basically like selling the grapes, and it was easy with Bob, and they didn't need to worry about it. My granddad got to farm, and then the wines were made. And so when me and my brother got interested, all we knew was that our grandparents had a vineyard in Napa. We didn't know any of its history. We didn't know if it was good quality. So we've gotten to discover every detail about the vineyard. And I feel like if you've ever been on a treasure hunt or have an urge to gamble, there's something exciting about that discovery or taking the chance. And for us, the powerful thing was we didn't even know that our vineyard was part of To Kalon.
Wow.
And we didn't know that if the wine quality was good. And what changed it was I was underage. I was 18, and I called Mondavi asking to taste the family juice or the family wine. And the winemaker heeded that and invited me by, and we were sitting there tasting. I remember specifically asking her, I said, what does our family vineyard mean to your program here at Mondavi? And I could see the cogs in her mind rotating as she was deciding whether to give me the corporate answer or the or the passionate answer. And thank God she did. She said, Graeme, your family's vineyard is one of my favorite vineyards out of everything we own.
Oh my God.
And that was the beginning of my just desire to learn everything. So not knowing that we were part of To Kalon, I started looking through the historical record. I was trying to understand why on our weight tags it kept saying To Kalon. And then I learned that our vineyards were part of the Robert Mondavi To Kalon Reserve, and then the To Kalon bottling above that. And then I did the historical research because I was just absolutely interested in learning more about To Kalon. And so I found all these ephemeral pieces of old letterheads of the grapes from our property going in. I got to learn what was planted on our property. I found a book written by the original proprietor that said what he did to farm the grapes. I mean, it's
H.W. Crabb?
Yeah, it's just been such a rewarding journey. And so then the next step for me is I've always been asking everyone involved with To Kalon, but also myself, is what can we do to add value? Because in my mind, To Kalon is relevant because it's the first discussion in America about what does it mean to have Grand Cru, or people keep calling it first growth, but that implies brand ownership, not land. And so I think it's such a fascinating thing because it's the only vineyard that in every era of Napa winemaking history is famous. And that's what truly makes that great in my mind. Is in the pre-Prohibition era, it was famous not for Cabernet. It was Crabb's Black Burgundy, which is a Refosco Mondouse thing, and then Zinfandel and various other things. So for you to transcend varietals, and there's really got to be something special about the site.
For a lot of us that are looking from the outside in, even those that consider ourselves fairly learned about the wine world, this is a blue chip vineyard, and this is a cult appellation, really. There's nothing in Oakville that people don't, crave and think it's some of the best wines made in the world. And here you are talking about adding value, not really capitalizing on the name and the fame. Did you ever have this moment when you realized you kind of hit a viticultural lottery? I mean, if you were to participate in any space in the valley, this would be the ultimate. Was there a moment for you where you said, "Oh my God, this is it. This is the ultimate"?
Yeah, it was the moment. My wife is a cartographer, and so she had been working on a book for a guy named Richard Mendelson, who was the lawyer behind all the AVAs throughout Napa, and so he's fascinating. And I was telling him our sort of situation, and he convinced me over lunch. He said, "Well, you need to go trace the deeds. You need to go actually legitimize the history, because right now the marketing departments are in charge, and everything's a little vague." And so I went to the register's office and started tracing through the deeds, and I found the deed for Crabb purchasing our property, and I just, at that moment was when I felt so connected. And then on top of that, I went to the Historical Society for Napa Valley, and I was searching through the Yount files, and I found a letterhead before Crabb bought this parcel where he's buying the fruit from the previous owner, who was part of the Yount family, the grandson of George Yount. And it's this beautiful letterhead listing off every varietal that was planted on our property, and you get a different. I remember the Black Burgundy was $10 a ton, the Zinfandel was $8, Mataro, Burger, and then you got a discounted price for the rotted Mission and the various issues that you would have had viticulturally. And then you get to the bottom, and hay is $7 a ton, and you could yield more tons per acre via hay than grapes. And so theoretically you could make more money growing hay on this ground than you could grapes. And I just realized how delicate it was. And that sort of made it a moment where I felt connected. I said, oh, these people are people who struggled. These are not people who had wealth and didn't have to worry. These were people who depended on the land, and I felt so connected to them after that.
The conclusion of this interview can be found in the next podcast, already available for your download. Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson.